Afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on which part of the world you're dialing in from. And welcome to the first Zilient teleconference being broadcasted live across the web. While we touch on this very important topic today, quite fittingly, World Refugee Day, as we speak about displaced people and how the world has changed, and how is it that financial inclusion is working, and how is it making the resilience effort much better in a lot of these countries. So please bear with me as we welcome Tia Anderson and Zilient Mujki with us today on this call. And let's give it another minute or so before they each do their introductions as people continue to dial in. In the meantime, let's just look at some of the stats which are around there with people which have been financially excluded or living on the margins of society. So we speak about the 2.2 billion people who don't have identity, which is the first challenge which we have in bringing people into the financial inclusion crisis. How do you give somebody an account, or how do you include them when they cannot prove who they are? We then also speak about the millions of people which have got no access to banking facilities, and how is this being changed? Very interesting topics today to be covered by Tia as well as Zilient. So Tia, can I hand over to you, and could you do a brief introduction of who and what you are at Mercy Corps and how Mercy Corps is just approaching this topic in general?
Sure, thanks so much. So at Mercy Corps, I lead our portfolio that's focused on financial services and in protracted crisis, which is a large and growing area for Mercy Corps. For those of you that aren't familiar with Mercy Corps, we're an international agency working in 40 countries globally, primarily focused on countries that are affected by fragility, conflict, protracted crises, natural disasters, and I would say increasingly countries and regions within countries that are dealing with economic and political crisis. Mercy Corps really looks and works at scale. Last year, we reached over 30 million people, including 8 million refugees and host community members, including almost 1.5 million smallholder farmers. We're also responding today to some of the world's worst humanitarian crises. For example, the Lake Chad crisis in West Africa, Afghanistan, Somalia, dealing with quite a bit of drought in Somalia, as well as Ethiopia, South Sudan, refugees going into Uganda, as well as the Syria crisis. From a digital finance perspective, we have initiatives in around 30 countries, and with an increasing focus on digital finance. And more, which I think we'll get into in today's conversation, is really working at that nexus of humanitarian response and economic coping and recovery, with an eye to entry points for longer term financial inclusion for different segments of the population.
Thank you for that. Zilient, could you tell us more about yourself as well as the company that you've started?
Sure. So IFMR really works to ensure that every individual, every enterprise has complete access to financial services. And we have a three-pronged strategy to do this. We work at the level of the household. So we provide, wealth management and complete financial services in remote rural India to about 800,000 households. We also provide capital markets access to small financial institutions that are serving the underbanked and the excluded in various different asset classes. And the capital markets platform has scaled up quite a bit, is providing almost $2 billion of financing per annum. Overall, we impact over 20 million customers till date. And the overall approach has been, how can we use financial innovation as a tool to really drive impact and scale? This is why I think the conversation today about the future of finance really is super exciting.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's no small fry to reach those numbers of people that you're speaking about. Tia, can I go back to you for a minute? And could you tell me or share with the panel more broadly, why is it that Mercy Corps sees financial inclusion as such a critical part of the work that you are doing globally?
Sure. So for Mercy Corps, we see financial services really not as an end to itself, but really a rather means to an end. Really looking at financial services and longer term financial inclusion really as an enabler to our longer goals, both in the development sector, whether we're working on an initiative that's focused on long-term food security or looking for access, for example, to water or energy. We look at financial services as really allowing the end clients that we're working with the ability to reach those goals. And I would say just larger, looking at the sustainable development goals, there's not a huge focus specifically on financial services, but that's because we view them as really embedded with each of those goals. So for us, financial services, whether that's very, very small scale community level versus large scale working with a government agency or mobile network operators for bulk payments, we really see financial services as a critical key to both our work in the humanitarian sector and in the development sector.
Thank you. Sharita, similar question to you. Could you tell me, why is it that you are so passionate about driving financial inclusion, specifically in India? And can you share with us some of the impacts that you have seen about this change?
Yes. I mean, to us, sort of fundamentally, finance is, it's a tool, finance is sort of, it's a strange product, right? You don't get up in the morning and say, hey, I really want to buy accident insurance. It's just not that type of product, right? You either are protecting your household against some risk like health or drought or accidents, or you're worried about your children and their education, and you're using finance to save for the future. You need liquidity because you have volatile incomes. So finance is sort of the ultimate tool to me to smooth things out, to make your dreams and goals and aspirations happen. And it provides, what we believe deeply is that finance unlocks development, finance unlocks choices, and it's ultimately sort of unlocks the freedom of an individual or a household to make the choices they need to make about their future. Otherwise, it would, with unequal access to finance, it's as bad really, and as crippling as not having access to education or healthcare, because you just will not have the same opportunities. So in the areas that we operate, we have seen cultivable agricultural land go up, cattle ownership increase. There is a Harvard study that actually is doing a randomized control trial on the impact of impact of our branches and our rural retail operations. On the capital market side, just to give you a flavor, the pricing of let's say microfinance or low-income housing as credit asset classes have reduced over the last 8 or 9 years by almost 300 to 400 basis points, which is, I mean, sure, we could do more, but it's still a lot. The lower the risk premium on these asset classes, the easier it's going to be to provide access to finance. So we believe that both legs are important, and we've seen sort of significant impact of that already.
Sharita, so on that question of developing and reaching these people, how do you see technology impacting this going forward?
I think technology has the potential to change things completely. Just the way households access financial services today is horribly inconvenient, because the nearest we have in India, we have only, for example, 17 access points for every 100,000 population. Even after all, the ATMs and the bank branches and the banking correspondence, that is it. It's one of the poorest ratios in the world. And so you can imagine it's hard physically to get access to finance. Now, the mobile phone makes this easier. The smartphone also makes this easier. What we want to see ideally is that, let's say, if you have spare change and you're visiting a grocery store, you should be able to save that at the grocery store. Right? Finance should be a part of your everyday life. And we think that this is possible today because the number of access points with payment banks, and there are, almost 10 new payment banks, some of which are mobile network operators, which have taken the number of access points from, let's say 400,000 to 4 million. And that's a game changer. Right. And, I think the other thing that has changed in India is just the cost of authentication has come down. Everyone now has a unique ID, and almost everyone, 1.2 billion out of 1.3 billion. And, this process, which used to be very costly, now makes this customer very accessible and reachable, because you can verify who they are, and you can reach them on the mobile. While some